One of the biggest challenges and mindset shifts when companies move from B2B sales over to business to government, B2G sales, is this lack of understanding around capture. So I want to break down what does it typically look like in B2B sales, and then how are things different on the federal side, and what is capture that to me kind of encapsulates what is different about the overall process. So when you're selling B2B, oftentimes you'll find your buyer, yay, stick figures, and they've got money. Now, obviously, the bigger the organization you're selling to, more the enterprise level, larger companies, this is going to be a little more complicated. But in general, you've got someone with buying power, they've got a problem, maybe they've got some sort of other entity that's going to help with the purchasing, but these are a bit more tied together than what you're going to see on the federal government side. So the distance between meeting the customer and their pain points, again, depends on size, but generally it's not that big of a gap between them and some sort of agreement or contract. On the federal government side, this is a giant federal acquisition regulation guided process. It's overall just called the acquisition process. So there are thousands of pages of regulations between this guy that says, hey, I've got a problem, a different channel and different process to go through finance to get funding, I won't get into. But then hey, I found a vendor that can solve my problem. I want to work with them. Well, there's this giant process in the middle that is that acquisition process. So what happens, and the way that this works is, first I'll break down this acquisition process, and then I'll talk about how does capture kind of come into contact and influence this overall process. So you find your customer, they've got a pain point. Let's skip a step here and say they've got funding as well. So they say, hey, I love this vendor. I want to work with them. I like this technology. It meets the needs. It would save lives. Let's work with them. Then they're going to go to a contracting officer. So the contracting officer is going to say, hey, it's cool that you think this company will solve your problems, but what you need to give me is a requirement. So what a requirement is, it's a bunch of paperwork, and in that requirement, we're going to have something like specifications or a statement of work, performance work statement, a couple different versions there. But basically, you have to take your needs and you have to write them down on a piece of paper. The contracting officer is then going to go and do market research. So that's one of the first stages here. I'm going to do market research to look at what vendors are out there that we think can solve this problem. Now, what would often happen when I was this contracting officer, someone come to me and say, hey, I want an Apple computer. Hey, I want this car. Hey, I want this very specific thing. And I would say, whoa, it's my job as contracting to get competition. It's my job. It's a huge part. It's our part 6, Federal Acquisition Regulations, part 6, that really drives this need and kind of the core of how they approach things, of getting multiple bids and then usually picking the lowest price. That's a soapbox I'll get on later. So point being, they say, hey, no, you can't just have an Apple computer. Write down all the little specifications about it. Does it need a keyboard? Does it need a number pad? Does it need to connect to Wi-Fi? What kind of display? What's the quality of display? USB ports, all these different things. So you have to take, hey, I have this problem. This thing solves my problem. And you have to break it down in minuscule detail. Then they'll go out and do this market research piece. There's set-asides. I won't get into that. It's complicated. Basically, I'll leave it at that. Then they will release in a public domain the request for proposal, RFP. Again, there's different versions here. And ultimately, they will evaluate. I want to hit eval because that's a very important piece. So there's going to be an evaluation there. So what is super important is what they put into the request for proposal as to how are they going to evaluate and select the award. Almost always, price is going to be a huge piece of this. Even when they say they'll make their award selection based on best value, it almost always gets racked and stacked by price. So then instead of saying, hey, technical merit or past performance or any of this is the most important, and racking and stacking based on what they said is most important, they rack and stack on price, and then they have to justify paying more money. So what this means is you're always arguing against price, and you're always bidding at this point against a very poorly written requirement. And I'm not trying to pick on the government customer. They have full-time jobs, they're wearing multiple hats, they have all kinds of additional duties. they're pulled in so many different directions, and then you throw into it that they're, especially on the military side, they're moving every 2 to 3 years, sometimes more often than that. There's deployments in the mix, TDYs, temporary duty assignments for training and this, that, and the other. So it's really hard to sit down and turn like, I need this, I want that, into a well-written requirement. So you're now bidding, race to the bottom on price on a poorly written requirement. This is the normal process. So when we talk about selling to the government, relationships, yeah, they're important. But then there's this giant months-long, sometimes years-long, oftentimes years-long process in the middle between here's what I need and here's the actual contract award at the end of it. So that finally brings us to capture. What is capture? Capture is influencing this. It's taking everything from I have a customer with funding to the actual contract award. So again, not too complicated, usually, asterisk, on the commercial side compared with navigating the thousands of pages of regulations and dealing with a contracting officer and finance and program managers, all that stuff that happens here. So capture is taking this relationship to contract award and navigating these pieces. What we like to do, the way that we approach this, is we'll often go through things like SBIR, SBIR, phase 1s or 2s. We'll go through prototype OTs, can check the box through marketplaces and BAAs, things like that. Check the box for competition. So that means whenever the requirement comes here, we can shape before it comes to this contracting officer to say, hey, we're allowed and authorized or even encouraged by statute, by law, to do this on a sole source basis. Here's your requirement package and all those different pieces. Then they're going to go and verify and do market research, do a bunch of documentation, get approvals before they go and do the RFP and all of that. So capture is helping shape things so it can either be done on a competitive basis where you're trying to influence maybe how they write the technical approach, what is put in the requirements, beefing that up so it's not just garbage or it's not written for someone else, something that you can actually play in. So all that to say is a big mistake I often see is that companies are jumping in at this point. They are responding instead of shaping. So you're not going to have much success in working with the federal government if you are simply responding, because there are so many companies that have been around, the big primes and those that have been playing the game for decades that understand everything that happens here. So before you ever see the final solicitation coming out on the street, there has been shaping, there's been draft RFPs, there have been requests for information on this market research saying like, hey, industry, I don't know who's out there. I don't know who can solve this problem or meet this requirement for me. So that's a chance to say, here's an innovative solution. Here's why you need to solve your problem this way with this kind of technical approach. So if you're simply responding, your probability of win is much lower because this game is going on, whether or not you know it, whether or not you're paying attention to it and playing it. So what capture is either playing this game up front on the competitive side, or it's helping shape this so that it becomes a direct or sole source award instead of going out there, for competition. Generally, when contracting officers and government, they are trained to follow this lengthy, competitive, FAR-based process. The idea, the whole cornerstone of it is to get competition, to get multiple bids. To me, the process is so confusing and bureaucratic that only the players that really understand this game and know how to do the shaping before the solicitation comes out, those are the only people that can actually play. And then you get into like the proposal and compliance and all the other issues that come into play during this formal process. So to me, the cornerstone of, hey, we need to get competition, so let's have this very archaic, clunky process, it actually removes most companies, the vast majority of companies out there that could solve the government's problems, can't play. Or if they do play, they don't get the game that they're playing and they lose. What I think is a better approach is, honestly, like if everyone had sole source authority, that to me would be ideal, because then you could run pilot projects, do smaller awards, see who can actually deliver on what they're promising, see who actually meets the needs of these government customers, try a couple different things at a smaller dollar amount, and then pick a winner and scale that winner up. So that to me is kind of the ideal situation. And again, the reason that we approach stuff on the sole source basis is we're trying to get leading edge technology into the hands of the warfighter. If you're coming in and you can only make 8% profit margins here through this archaic process, but you're making 70% profit margins on the commercial sector, plus you've got cyber security requirements, compliance requirements, security clearance requirements, it's a nightmare, and you're making crap margins, who's going to want to play? No one. We're not going to get the best tech to the warfighter. So if we actually approach this as, here's different direct award pathways, putting it in front of the government, sometimes using like phase twos as an easy example. Hey, here's, work with different companies, see the different technology, see who can actually deliver on their promise and maybe make changes to their tech to better fit your need, and then throw tens of millions of dollars at them to scale up that solution and broaden that impact across the enterprise, across multiple bases, squadrons, across the program offices, whatever it might be. So that to me is a better approach. And that to me is the approach that we have to take because things keep heating up. No matter what you're feeling about this war in Iran, we have brothers and sisters in arms, my classmates, many of our employees, their spouses they're deploying. They're looking at, their squadrons, their units are deploying. So no matter what you think, kind of more generally or higher level about the war in the Middle East, it's war with Iran, we owe it to our warfighter to give them the best tools, to keep them safe, to execute their mission to the best of their ability. So to me, the way that we do that is through these sole source contracts. It's doing capture. So to summarize, what capture is if you're in a competitive environment, it's shaping things before it comes out for proposal and then kind of through that final award. And this is where proposal kind of comes in and helps. On a sole source basis, capture is taking that customer, that requirement, and shaping things even before really it gets to contracting and showing that it's not only authorized by statute, it's encouraged, or you can use authorities outside of the federal acquisition regulations like other transactions, OTs. So you can go outside the FAR with OTs and get the actual technology, the actual solution that you need. There's way more flexibility to try different things out. Anyways, capture is shaping it before it even goes to contracting in some of those sole source environments, or getting at the very least involved here in the very early stages and making the case for, hey, this can be done with some unique authorities that helps you cut this down to a couple of months instead of 12 to 18 months or even longer, depending on the size. So that's capture. Thanks for watching. There you go.